Good morning. Welcome to IR Insight Live. We're here at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. I'm your host, Will Briganti. Joining me as my guests today are Tom Dorsey and Jay Gragnani from Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
Good morning.
All right, it's great to have you as our guests today on a special segment. Today we're going to talk about technical analysis, so I have a few questions for you both. But Tom, I'd like to start with you. Give us a broad overview on what technical analysis is.
Well, a broad overview of technical analysis is more in line with the irrefutable law of supply and demand, looking at charts. In the end, if there are more buyers than sellers willing to sell, price will rise. If there are more sellers than buyers willing to buy, price will decline. And this is a methodology of showing this on charts. There are many different charting methodologies. Point and figure technical analysis is what we do in the books that I've written on the subject. But it's become mainstream now.
So talk to us a little bit, particularly for our viewers who may not be familiar with Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. How does that play into the formula at Nasdaq Dorsey Wright, and what exactly are you guys?
Well, with Nasdaq Dorsey Wright, the interesting thing about that, if you went to, let's say, a branch office 40 years ago, when I started business 45 years ago, and you said, where's the technical analyst? They say, he's sitting in the back of the room there, kind of quiet, he's working with the charts and whatnot. Don't bother him. It was always looked at that way. It was looked at as the stepchild that you don't want to bring up from the bottom floor, until Nasdaq bought Dorsey Wright. Nasdaq bought Dorsey Wright and Associates. That made a major statement about technical analysis. It had now come from the back, off the back room, the back level, to the front. Ralph Acampura worked his whole career getting technical analysis on the same level as fundamental analysis, the CFA and the CMT. It's finally that's been done. The Securities Exchange Commission now recognizes technical analysis on the same level as fundamental analysis. So it's here.
Terrific.
And I think the exclamation point was when Nasdaq bought Dorsey Wright and Associates.
Absolutely.
And Dorsey Wright and Associates needed that because you can, as an entrepreneurial organization, you can only go so far before you need to step up into the large institutional area. And that's where we are now.
Tom, thank you for that overview. Jay, let's switch to you for a second. And our viewers are typically looking for sector information. So from a technical perspective, what sectors are doing well right now and why?
Yeah, so when you look at the market, we look at all different sectors, broad sectors as well as industry groups, and really for the past year and a half now, that's been even further done this year is technology. Technology continues to be the #1 ranked sector within our relative strength work. It continues to be the leadership area of opportunity. Right behind that would be financials, and some of the banks, especially some of the regional banks right now, are right there behind the growth or technology-oriented companies. And then lastly, I think it wouldn't go without mentioning is energy. Energy is the sector that here over the past month has really emerged as a leadership trend within the broader equity market, as crude oil itself, but also a lot of the energy names. Some of the big integrated oil companies down to some of the exploration and drillers have really come on here over the past couple months and moved up into that leadership position. And out of the 11 kind of broad macro sectors that we're looking at, those are the top 3 right now. Technology, financials, and then energy would be in there at #3.
Jay, thank you for that overview. Let's look at what's on the bottom of that list. So which sectors from a technical perspective aren't doing as well?
Sure.
Why?
And that's interesting because one of the things that we talk about is, certainly very important to understand which areas are doing well and which areas we want to own in the portfolio. But also equally as important is understanding which areas are out of favor and which areas we don't want to own. And a lot of those areas, especially this year, that have been out of favor, that have been laggard sectors in the markets, are things that tend to be very interest rate sensitive. So right at the top of that list would be things like real estate or REITs. Utilities, and then finally consumer staples. There's a big swath of just broad large cap value consumer staple stocks that have been in negative trends for the vast majority of the year now. So those are still areas that we would continue to avoid in the portfolio.
That's interesting because consumer confidence continues to kind of trend a little bit higher.
That's right.
Tax checks are kind of coming in now, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what that looks like maybe in a couple months.
That's right. Absolutely.
You know what it feels like? It almost feels like when I first came into the business.
Sure.
Back in 1974, 75. So when oil began to really start going, inflation was in full swing. It almost feels like the same time as 1975.
Okay. Before we leave it, I'd love to get a sort of final take from you all in terms of where our viewers can get more information on Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. And I heard that there's a webinar coming up too. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's going to be very important. Investors are going to now begin, I think they're going to begin asking about stocks and stock trading. This is where you want to learn it. In this webinar that's coming up, I think it's on the 12th, is it?
Okay.
Sign up for that. Be sure to take it. This is the beginning. Learn the basics of technical analysis. It's going to come home to you.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, Tom Dorsey, Jay Regnani, thank you so much for being our guests on IR Insight Live. We really appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in to the June 4th edition of IR Insight Live here from the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. I'm your host, Will Briganti. Be sure to tune in for more information. You can find our program here on business.nasdaq.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.